This resolution before this Honourable House, the National Assembly of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan reposes its full confidence in the leadership of Mian Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif as the Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. I would like to present this resolution before
80 members rose in favor of the resolution and the resolution is passed. Consequently, Mian Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif has obtained the vote of confidence from the National Assembly and commands the confidence of the majority of the members of the National Assembly as Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
बनाना आइन में तरमीम करना ये पार्लियामान का इख्तियार है। अदलिया को आइन रीराइट करने का कोई इख्तियार नहीं, ये हो नहीं सकता। आज ये है वो कानून की खिलाफ वर्जी और आइन की खिलाफ वर्जी जो हो रही है। मौलवी तमीजुद्दीन का केस हो, चाहे मरहूम जुल्फ़िकार अली भुट्टो का केस हो, चाहे नवाज शरीफ या मखदूम यूसुफ रज़ा गिलानी का केस हो, जब तक कि ये किरदार कटहरे में नहीं आएंगे, खड़े किए जाएंगे, मैं आपको बताऊं पाकिस्तान में अदल और इंसाफ हमेशा नापैद रहेगा। मैं आपको बिल्कुल दिल की बात करना चाहता हूं। आइन को
Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be talking about the political developments that took place today. And of course, you saw earlier what happened in the Parliament House as well. And then, of course, the Supreme Court, there were important developments as well with regards to the case regarding the elections to be held in Punjab. And this, of course, is something that is being witnessed as a deadlock since quite some time now, especially since the Supreme Court's earlier orders of May 14th being declared as the date on which elections in Punjab are to be held as per the Constitution. It's also important in terms of what the Supreme Court has spoken about today in reference also to what the Prime Minister said earlier and has repeated today at the Parliament, that the job of any institution besides the Parliament is not to arbitrate or decide on any political matters, and therefore arbitration is not the job of the courts, and this is something that is best left to the Parliament and to the political party, something that has been echoed by the Chief Justice of Pakistan in the Supreme Court hearing today, where he has said that this is not something that the Supreme Court intended to do, but in fact the upholding of the Constitution holds supremacy, and it was because of that that the suggestion with regards to the negotiations between different political parties was directed by the Supreme Court. But of course, this puts question marks to the earlier order of the Supreme Court of holding the Punjab polls on the 14th of May, and also with regards to the deadline that has passed today with reference to the political consultations and a consensus for the political parties to achieve regarding the date of elections, something that of course has not happened so far. But we know of course that a committee has been formed by the Speaker Senate, and because of that the issues with regards to elections are being discussed now by the opposition and the political setup. And with reference to the discussions, it has been reported that they are being held in a positive manner, and that it is expected that the both the sides will be talking about only one point agenda, which is the elections, and that this is something that's going to be done in favor of the country and in favor of the Constitution. But despite that, of course, we know that the Supreme Court is also going to be issuing a written order on the matter, and that of course remains to be seen as to what it is. According to the earlier statements coming in from the courts, if there is no consensus till the 27th of April, which has passed today, the order as it was before regarding 14th of May will be conducted and will be the order of the House. But of course, we know that the Parliament has rejected this, and again in the vote of confidence that was taken by the Prime Minister today in a resolution moved by the Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, the issues and talks regarding the threat of contempt and the issues of confidence in the Prime Minister have also been put to bed, with the Speaker also announcing 180 votes in favor of the Prime Minister. And then, of course, in a speech at the House, the Prime Minister also spoke about how it is going to be the Parliament's decision with regards to upholding the Constitution, and that they reject anything that is not in line with the Constitution and is not the decision of the majority. And this is important in terms of the rift that we've been witnessing between the judiciary and the Parliament over the last couple of days, and how exactly that is going to evolve, particularly with reference to the consultations now underway and going to be resumed tomorrow, and also with reference to the elections that are as of now still expected to be held on the 14th of May, but of course there seems to be no likelihood of the matter. So that is going to be the discussion that we're going to hold in the debate today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi. We've also been joined online by Dr. Niaz, Murtaza, who's a political analyst, and Mr. Muhammad Muneeb Qadir, who's a legal expert. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the discussion. Let me start with you, Dr. Niaz. The issues surrounding, of course, the concern of the Parliament and the judiciary are important. But in terms of what has taken place with reference to the vote of confidence by the Prime Minister is also important, because it seems that there was a lot of controversy surrounding whether or not there is going to be any threat of contempt against the Prime Minister, whether or not he enjoys the confidence of the House. And of course, that has been put to bed by the vote of confidence today. But how important and necessary do you think that this has been for the current political setup, and whether that says something about the situation?
Well, certainly, having a vote of confidence always helps. It shows that, the coalition is still strong and intact despite all the pressures, the economic pressures, the political pressures, and, some of, the differences of opinion with, say, MQM on the census issue. But then, at the end of the day, everybody got together and gave the vote of confidence. Now, obviously, the situation that the government faces is not one of a vote of no confidence. Really, it's more of a legal matter. But still, I mean, it's a symbolic act that, the coalition partners are together with the government on, its standoff, even with, say, the Supreme Court and so on. But I think also very important is what happened in the court today. I think we seem to be stepping back from the brink, and, I think the Supreme Court has wisely given, more leeway and space for, the political parties to try to resolve it. And then more importantly, a round of, negotiations did take place. They were brief, they were initial, but at least, they've gotten together around, a table to, try to resolve it. So I think that's the right way to go ahead. Try to come up with, some sort of a resolution, a political resolution, and then if it needs, to be backed up with some sort of a constitutional amendment, then, they should go for that. Because otherwise, just trying to, do it informally, or even by trying to, get the Supreme Court's approval, will not change the fact that elections were required to be held in 90 days and they are not being held. So, they need to find, a constitutional way of covering that. Otherwise, it will, make a bad precedence for the future. But all in all, I think things are moving in the right direction. And I hope some of the political tensions, reduce because of this, and, politicians start behaving like politicians, not, like sworn enemies, and try to resolve, the huge problems that the country is facing. I hope it leads to, a situation where, there is some return of decency, and then, institutions stay within their, domains, instead of, legal institutions trying to become, political institutions and so on.
Right, absolutely. Mr. Muneeb, the concerns, of course, regarding the Supreme Court's orders are still there. There was, of course, an apparent deadline that was given for the political parties. And now, of course, the stance of the CJP seems to be different on the matter. But in terms of the election date, it was earlier stated that if there is no consensus on the matter, then the date of 14th of May still stands. And we still haven't seen the written order from the Supreme Court on the matter. What sort of a difference can there possibly be? Because, of course, the issue regarding the orders of the Supreme Court not being followed by the Parliament still stands.
So much has happened in such a short span of time, and the Supreme Court seems to have taken a very soft stance as compared to where they stood last week. Because just today, the Chief Justice said that it was not within the Supreme Court's jurisdiction or powers to force the government to enter into talks with opposition parties, but only to guide or maybe to advise that they do enter into talks to overcome this impasse. But at the same time, there have been a lot happening with respect to the judiciary. A lot of questions are being raised regarding the independence of the judiciary, unfortunately, in the wake of the recent audio calls leak, either relating to top judges' relatives or former chief justices. So, I mean, there are a lot of speculations being made that perhaps a softening of the Supreme Court's stance today could have something to do with that, but those are all speculations. What we see on the face of it is that the Supreme Court has moved away from almost ordering the government to enter into talks with the opposition to now suggesting that you enter into talks, and neither did the Chief Justice or the Apex Court seem to be insistent on holding the election 14th May today. They were more insistent on, or they were pressing more on the need of the parties to have a talk among themselves, and that did eventually happen. But coming to the talks, I mean, it was quite a progressive step that members from the opposition PTI as well as the incumbent PTM government, they sat today and they had table talks today in the Parliament building. But at the same time, would these talks bear any fruit? Would something come out of it? Because after the Prime Minister has secured a vote of confidence in the National Assembly, there's a renewed confidence that one can glean from his body language and his tone, and he knows that he commands the majority of the parliament. And with that, strength to back him up, the PDM government's claims are still very rigid, I believe, and rightly so, if one may say, that they want elections to take place on the same day, both the provincial assemblies and the National Assembly one, and they also want accountability and restorative justice for all that had happened to the opposition parties of those times during the PTI's government. And I don't think that the PTI is going to take very favorably to these demands. So there's a lot of deadlock even now between the parties. And one last thing, that I have observed is that 2-3 days ago, there was this sham of a, rally or a gathering of the PTI and their supporters at Zaman Park, where I could see an actor mimicking Maulana Fazlur Rahman. Now, that attitude, where you're making jokes about your political opponents, I don't think that is very conducive to a friendly environment which would enable opposition parties and the parties belonging to the current government to be able to have a constructive talk among themselves. I think that these are the areas which need to be addressed. Do the parties respect each other, particularly the PTI? Is it going to take is it going to take its political opponents seriously, or are they still going to be, mocking them?
Absolutely, and it's important for us to understand that, of course, whether or not that even is a priority and an importance given by different political parties, or whether something is conducive to an environment of negotiations or not. But in terms of Farrukh, where we stand with negotiations, earlier we of course had this stance of a pressure or a deadline coming in from the courts, which seemed to be no longer there. Then there's of course the opposition that is coming from the JUIF, that they do not want to engage in talks with the PTI. They also did not participate in the talks today. But with regards to where we stand and perhaps this entire urgency of elections being held in May also gone, the situation seems to be just going towards elections, as was earlier talked about by the current political setup in October or November. And because of that, where do you think the urge to actually move forward with any sort of consultative process or consensus would actually come from, if at the end of the day it seems that this is where the situation is headed?
Right. Sana, I think that many of my worthy colleagues in the media have been jumping guns, right? You have to understand that for a long time, this 3-member bench kept on using sticks, right? No carrots at all. But then there was introduction of carrot and stick policy. But, whether we like it or not, today was about carrots, not sticks. Because during the last hearing, especially the hearing regarding release of funds, there was a private citizen who came up and who actually approached the bench and asked whether the election should not be actually held on the same day. So that was a kind of concession which followed the briefing by the DGIS, ISI, DGMI and DGMO and certain other officials, right? After that, we saw that there was this grudging permission of flexibility where that, Shakhawar prayer or petition was, accepted immediately, and the next day the bench heard the issue as well. Now the problem is, why is there confusion? Today was never about any kind of consequences for the government disobeying any order coming from the Supreme Court. Today was essentially about this hunky-dory scenario where all sit on a table and they start, singing a swan song. Now, where is the stick? The stick actually comes into effect tonight at 12 o'clock. When the deadline for the release of funds to the ECP actually passes. We'll have to see what becomes of that tomorrow. Whether, of course, today it was pointed out by my colleagues which were there observing the bench, that the demeanor of the bench was quite different. Of the three judges, only Chief Justice spoke, and that too, in a limited manner. The other two were silent. But this could have very easily been the lull before the storm. So we don't know what exactly is going to happen. Now the second step is that in one of the previous hearings, Justice Muneeb Qadir had actually pointed out that because a money bill, an appropriations bill was defeated in the parliament, in the National Assembly, then usually the government actually loses its majority, right? Usually it is thought that if the House cannot pass a money bill, then the Prime Minister and his team have lost confidence of the Parliament. So after that we saw an order in which it was said that the Attorney General of Pakistan had actually said that there is no such thing and there is no such concern, and we accept that, that assertion on face value. After that we saw something else as well. When this issue was accepted, and today I think that the government actually went for the jugular. It wanted to ensure that there is no confusion about the majority of the government. That said, today in the chamber, today in the courtroom, there must have something that might have actually transpired, because immediately we saw that the Attorney General for Pakistan actually came back and met Prime Minister, and after that we heard that of course the vote of confidence was already on the cards, because our pundit friends were already talking about it. But the second thing that happened was that immediately the constitution or announcement of the team to negotiate, we heard Sanjarani Saab is playing a role, and then PTI also actually came to the table. Right now, as the situation is, the PTI and government, the introductory round is over. They are going to actually meet again tomorrow. And as you pointed out, so far we haven't seen the order in the case that was promised by the judges. We have to wait and see what exactly is that. But remember, this could be lull before the storm. Tomorrow could be a different day.
Absolutely. And let me also welcome in the debate Mr. Qaiser Ahmed, who's Special Assistant to the Prime Minister. He's joined us in the studios. Welcome to the debate, Mr. Qaiser. And with regards to the discussion around what has happened today, let me start with what we were discussing earlier regarding the issue of negotiations and the fact that when we take a look at the current scenario, it seems that both the sides seem now more willing to talk about the election date and come on a particular matter. But there also seems to be no real urgency to the matter or no real timeline to these consultations, even though the PTI side has said that they will be giving reports to the Supreme Court on Monday. But in terms of where we stand today and how the current political setup, including the Prime Minister, has reiterated that elections will be held in October and November, what sort of room there is for both the parties to even talk about this matter anymore? Will there be any sort of middle ground? If the agenda is only elections and the date of elections, what can possibly be part of the negotiations?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You see, you have talked about date of election. I think it will definitely be decided mutually, because even today, if we count 90 days from now on, then it becomes August, May, June, July, then it becomes August, and we are asking for election by 8th of October. The difference is 2 months, even today if the assemblies are dissolved. So I think it is not a big problem to settle this matter, and it is in the interest of the PTI, who claims that they are a popular party. So they have no other option. What options they have? If they go to confrontation, because PMLN and other allied parties, they are not contesting the elections in Punjab. So if they continue to have conflict, what benefit they are going to arrive? Elections will not be held in order, and no one will accept the results of those elections. So there is no other option available to PTI. They should, and we have asked them to come to table and to negotiate, because you see the economy is in a worse condition, and this scenario there is no reason that we should continue to conflict between on this minor item. We should discuss more about how to find a solution of the economic mess which is being faced by the people. There is inflation, there are reserves are depleting, and then IMF still is not finalized. Those are the things which should have been discussed further. And I don't know why the court may decide one date, but if on that date the elections are not unanimously held, held, then what is the benefit PTI is gaining out of that? No other option available to PTI. They have been claiming asking for the election since more than 1 year. So what happened? No result. No, 2 months are left. And I think it is in the benefit of their own, it is in their own interest that they should accept to the agreed date of 8th of October. It's not so far from now.
All right, Dr. Niaz, of course, as Qaiser was mentioning, the PTI, of course, has been talking about early elections, perhaps since the ouster of the former Prime Minister, and we've been hearing that since then, and now we're so close to the actual schedule of the elections. In terms of the negotiations going forward, and the PTI stance now, again, obviously different from before in terms of its consultations with the political setup, what has been referred to as thieves in the past, it seems that there isn't a lot of room for the PTI to also be able to save face. How exactly will there be any face saving for the PTI if there is going to be no real change from the date of elections?
Well, yeah, I mean, that is the issue. You know, I mean, it looks very a small matter of a couple of months. But, you know, there is the issue that, you know, there are some very important changes that are going to happen in September in terms of, you know, who will be in the presidency and, you know, who will be the Chief Justice. And all of that can make a huge difference. So it's not just a matter of those 2 months, it's also a matter of, you know, those kind of changes. And then the fact what you're talking about, you know, the face saving. What will you know, PTI go back with before its voters in terms of, you know, it's, you know, launched this huge prolonged kind of, you know, protests and, you know, dharnas, long marches, and so far it hasn't been able to get anything. So obviously there is, you know, a loss of face there. But then from the government's point of view also, it's very critical that, you know, they want to, you know, keep the elections as far as constitutionally possible. So there is a wide gulf between the two sides, which is not apparent if you just look at the 2 months. So let's see, you know, who gives in and, you know, what shape the talks do take. But then there is also the matter, that there is so much bad blood between the two, the lack of trust and so on. And then, the rigid positions, especially Imran Khan's rigid positions, that it cannot really be assumed that there will be an easy way of, resolving these gaps in the position of the two people. So it will require a lot of, creativity and give and take from both sides to be able to come to something that will be acceptable to both sides. And then there is also the issue that whatever is decided has to be within the limits of the constitution. They should not make a brag precedence by trying to resolve this issue informally. So a lot of ground to cover. It will be interesting to see how it all unfolds.
Right, Mr. Muneeb, the issue, of course, with regards to the judiciary and the parliament is also important, and we've talked about this before as well when we take a look at the stance that the parliament has taken in terms of the rejection of the Supreme Court order. That, of course, is an important one, and I want to understand its precedence and the impact that it's going to have if it seems that the Supreme Court itself seems to be perhaps shifting away from the stance of holding elections on the 14th of May. And if that actually happens, it means that a Supreme Court order then has, of course, been effectively rejected by the Parliament, and there seems to be no real consequence to the matter. What sort of impact will this have, and what significance does it hold in terms of the sanctity of Supreme Court's orders?
I believe that the 14th May elections, the possibility seems to be weaker with each passing day. I don't think that the election would now be able to take place on 14th May. The parties are now talking, and 14th May is coming closer and closer. But what's happened is that Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and his government, they have clearly indicated to the judiciary that they would respect judicial decisions only if they deem judicial decisions to be well within their constitutional boundaries. And so in that sense, this seems to have been a huge victory for Shehbaz Sharif, as I said, just now, that there is a renewed confidence that one can see in him, because he has stated his limits of what his government is ready to accept to and what they're not going to concede to at all. And also at the same time, this is a huge blow to Imran Khan's narrative as well, because he had been saying that he would never ever sit and talk with the PDM government. And now he sent a committee from his party to enter into negotiations with the PDM government. So this is tacit recognition of what he used to initially call an imported government. He's now admitting, tacitly, that this is a legitimate government and there is no way out for the PTI other than to enter into talks with them. And then, of course, the tussle between the judiciary and the executive, I think it intensified even more last week when Justice Muneeb Qadir challenged, Prime Minister's legitimacy as to whether he could claim to command the confidence of Parliament. And it is only in response to that a vote of confidence was held today, which the Prime Minister won with all votes in his favor, all 180 votes in his favor. So that's a huge victory. And through this vote of confidence that the Prime Minister's won, he's indicated if elections are not held, if Parliament with respect to the release of funds, then that is a matter internally to the Parliament. That does not indicate that the Parliament does not have confidence in the Prime Minister. It really does have that confidence. And also that, the Prime Minister has won the vote of confidence today. It means that for the next 6 months, and the general elections are due in the next 6 months anyway, October, the Prime Minister is secure in his seat. So whenever he's going to say something and whatever actions that his government is going to take, he would know that he's got the backing of the elected parliament. And what's really interesting is that today, although cross-party talks have taken place, Fawad Chaudhry was present on those talks with the government. Very interesting that, Fawad Chaudhry had tweeted against Prime Minister's victory in the National Assembly today, just a few hours ago before the meeting with the current government. So, on the face of it, perhaps progress might be forthcoming. One may say that there's been progress in cross-party talks, but I think there are a lot of grievances that the PTI still harbors against the government. And I'd say that, it's not a very friendly environment even now. It's only, the days to come which are going to unfold what the future has in store for us. Now, let's see. The Supreme Court had adjourned its decision for today. Let's see what happens tomorrow.
Right. Qaiser, there is also the discussion around the JUIF stance, and with regards to the negotiations held today, they also were, of course, not a part of it, and they've previously also been quite adamant that they will not be speaking to the PTI chairman, and there were efforts made by the leadership of PPP as well to bring them forward, and there were reports coming in that the process of dialogue and consultations will continue with the JUIF and not without. But how exactly is this now going to be proceeded upon? Do you think that there's any sort of possibility of the JUIF changing in stance, and whether or not the current political setup and the government, and especially the committee that has been formed, will be taking this conversation forward irrespective of the JUIF?
So now I feel a very optimistic person. I feel that the outcome is that there should be some consensus and some agreement on the date of election. Of course, you are right that JUI is adamant and they are not willing to talk and discuss with the PTI. But the thing is that the Prime Minister talked in National Assembly today in his speech. He mentioned that of course they are not agreeing, but all of us are going to convince them that if there is a mutual some agreement and political talk, we will like that they should also come forward to, if not directly in the discussion, they should agree to the whatever consensus is agreed. I mentioned to you earlier, the difference is only 2 months. At present, there is no other, for example, the court gives a date and PTI contested elections on that date in Punjab. What will be the result if the other parties are not going to contest on that date? And even today, there has been a huge conflict between them. There is grouping in PTI. If they are allotted ticket to one person, others, I know from the field that other groups are not happy on that, and there is those other groups, they are against the PTI and they are now coming to their opponent to get tickets for that. So this is not the advisable thing for PTI is that they should come forward, they should at present scenario they should agree to some mutual date, and that is not so far.
I understand that, but what effort is being done with regards to the JUIF?
I feel that JUI, even today, they are not agreeing, but eventually, it is my own impression, assumption that the JUI will also join eventually.
Okay, and if in the case it does not?
In the case it does not, then we will make a consensus decision, and we will definitely take JUI before making any final agreement. If they don't agree, then how can? But it is, you see, just a presumption. I tell you, they are also political persons. They are not against election. They are against the date of election. So that date will be, the difference is that of 2 months. And that because you see the elections are to be held, because it is not on JUI against that date, which is eventually the date after dissolution of assembly at the proper time. That is 13th August. JUI has never said that we are not agreeing on elections after 13th August. So 13th August, even I mentioned even today, 90 days we count that, we count 90 days that is in the beginning of August. So what is the difference between the beginning of August and
the limit has passed long before.
And the PTI didn't get any benefit out of this insistence that there should be election and 90 days. Legal things are of course there, but this is a political. I think it was not proper to go to the courts. We should come. The politicians have to discuss and have to find some way. This is the option. The politician's job to discuss and find solution for that.
Right, absolutely, but unfortunately it does seem that has been triggered from what the courts have had to say earlier as well, even though of course the stance is that that is not the role of the courts. But Farrukh, with regards to what has earlier been said, especially when we talk about the political parties and from where the PTI has come from, and the kind of rhetoric, the kind of allegations and statements that have been made, and of course coming from the current political setup as well, the way that the PTI chairman has also been talked about, how there have been talks with regards to him being a terrorist or the PTI being a terrorist organization. It seems that both sides have gone at lengths in terms of this animosity. And I understand what Dr. Niaz was earlier saying, that the politicians need to act as politicians and not sworn enemies. But do you think that it's simple to do that and to put all of this at bed and go forward with the consultations in the interest of the Constitution, and as politicians that is their job and that can be done, and whether or not that even is a good thing that you are able to put that into bed and move forward?
Right.
Without
Sana,
consequence.
Sorry, come
Without
again?
consequence.
Right. Again, you keep on saying that there are not going to be any consequences. That was my answer in earlier question as well. That we don't know what consequences might entail, what might follow in coming days, right? Especially because I have just pointed out this carrot and stick policy, and we don't know how exactly is the Supreme Court going to behave tomorrow. Let us hope that they are going to maintain this conciliatory tone or this demeanor, because it is more becoming of their stature, not the individuals, but the stature of the office itself. So that would be good news. But because at this moment we can't be sure, it is true, and I totally agree with Qaiser Sheikh Saab, that it is better to keep this discussion among politicians rather than anybody else. But regarding the date, Sana, the date issue somehow has become too important, and that actually reflects on how weak our system is. How many privileges have been exploited or abused in the past few months, so to speak. For example, a chief executive's right somehow, blind right to actually dissolve an assembly without an explanation. That we saw in 2 provinces, and I want to ask, why was it even conceived that there shouldn't be any checks and balances, right? Similarly, regarding the internal politics of Supreme Court of Pakistan, why is it that somehow the Chief Justice of Pakistan, who is actually thought to be the one among the equals, somehow becomes Faisalabad's Ghantaghar, that all roads actually lead to the same lighthouse, right? Centralization of power without checks and balances is always bad. And we are doing this and we are debating this because the biggest element that used to actually topple the apple cart, that is the army, has already declared that it is going to follow checks and balances, and it will try every bit possible to stay away from politics, right? So all we have to do is try to fix our own houses as well. At that time, instead of debating date for an election which has to take place. Remember, during Pervez Musharraf's time, there was a consensus that elections, Parliament will complete its tenure. And since that time, and give the devil his due, since then the parliaments of the elected parliaments of the country have been completing their terms in office. So at this moment, all this effort to somehow force an early election date goes against the salt or the grain of that consensus. At this moment, I think the bigger thing that needs to be debated is how to ensure that there is a transparent election. PTI can somehow, if there is going to be some effective debate, it can come back to the parliament somehow. There is even a possibility that the 2 dissolved assemblies can be dissolved, brought back into existence. With that kind of a situation, you can create the kind of masonry which is needed to hold fair and free elections. But let us focus on things that matter. Transparency of elections, not a date which is for the sake of a date. Because of that, we keep on fighting. And then one final thing, Sana, one issue that I am looking at. And this is, as a citizen, I want to see this confidence building measure coming from all our elites. For example, from the Chief Justice also among the politicians. The biggest question at this moment that is looming large is regarding when the elections take place, who is going to be the Chief Justice of Pakistan. Whether it happens during this Chief Justice time, I heard one media conduit of Malik Riaz actually saying that Chief Justice's presence does not affect the elections. That is not true. The whole system depends on, for ROs, the early or judiciary, lower judiciary, and because of that, there is a trickle-down effect. Whosoever is at the top can affect how elections actually take place, especially when it comes to appellate courts or appeal courts regarding the votes, right? In that situation, there is one problem that I see, that because the judiciary has divided itself, because this 3-4 member bench actually keeps on playing politics, and we have seen Qazi Faizisa, who is a rightful successor of the current CJ. Against him, there was a curative petition, and then the government actually went and requested that curative petition should be withdrawn, and the CJ actually holds the case, hears the case in his chamber and reserves the judgment. So first thing, if we want to actually win trust of people, dismiss that curative review, because that is very important. The second thing is, whatever happens, after so much bad blood that we have seen, after so many things that were never seen in this country's history, if the elections are going to take place under this CJ, that means before 16th of September, I tell you that at least as a citizen, I'm not going to trust them.
Right, and I'm glad that you raised this point, because Qaiser Sahib, I wanted to talk about this as well, because this case has not just been, of course, about the elections and the political parties' consultations. It's also been about the judiciary and the parliament and the inherent issues with regards to the legal proceedings that have been pointed out by the parliament and the CJP's powers, of course, and how, of course, there have been question marks raised to the moral authority and credibility of the Chief Justice, the benches and the courts. How exactly will whatever decision or written order comes from the courts, or whatever the consultation is regarding elections, is going to impact that? Will this also be something that is then going to be forgotten about, because the issue of elections has moved forward? What is the Parliament's stance on that?
Farrukh has very rightly mentioned that transparency of election is much more important than the date. You see, our history of elections, as I see in the past, in 1970 the elections were held, but the election results were not agreed, and then our country was dismembered. Then in 77 the elections were held, but after that election the election results were not agreed, and then again People Party and Murtaza they came in confrontation. Still we should have an atmosphere and to create a situation where the transparency of election is very, very important. If seeing our past history, you see they have been quoting PTI people have been quoting that even in UK the elections are held at Second World War. But their acceptability of election is different than us. We don't accept the results of election, and that's why transparency, and that also impacts the CJ. Who is the CJ here? Mr. Farrukh rightly mentioned. You see, but there should be some amicable solution, all of that, and that should be negotiated between the politicians who are the stakeholders, and they should have not gone to that court. You see, there are ample opportunities that to find out some solution, how to have amicably agreed elections. After election, if any party loses, they come to the dharna. So what will be the impact of that? So it is very important, and I think now the gap is not much. Timing is not as different. I mentioned that doesn't much difference. So we should have more and more debate maybe in the Senate now. We have appointed our committee. They have already agreed on their committee. So that's a good move. The chairman Senate can initiate that discussion to have the election which are acceptable to all stakeholders. And I feel, I'm an optimistic person, I feel all those elected people, they come from the people faith on them, and they have a confidence on them. So they would have to agree on some workable solution. Otherwise, there is no end to it. And now the elections are very near.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely, and it's important. Thank you very much, Qaiser Sahab, for being a part of the discussion. Thank you, Dr. Niaz, Murtaza, and thank you, Mr. Muneeb Qadir, for joining us. Yes, Farrukh. And
Very quickly,
before the end. Yes.
very quickly, I just wanted to add 2 lines here. One, there's a possible solution. If you want to actually hold the elections before the middle of September, or in the middle of September, then perhaps the Chief Justice of Pakistan should actually be kind enough to sacrifice for the cause of PTI and resign before that, right? If that happens, then the elections can take place even tomorrow. I don't mind that. But in this circumstances, if you want to hold this team as a synonym because they have shown that they are going to play politics within, and then you're going to hold election, that would create so much anarchy, Sana, I can assure you, that it won't be able to be handled. Secondly, of course, in any case, elections have to be held, and let us make them transparent so that all agree when it comes to result.
Absolutely. Thank you, Farrukh. And of course, that is the hope that the real substance of the matter is what is being deliberated upon and given the most importance. Of course, much remains to be seen as to what is going to happen tomorrow, especially with regards to the Supreme Court's written order. But whatever it is, we hope it's best for the country. Thank you, everyone, for being part of the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.